Good evening, everyone. A quorum of the City Council being present, I call tonight's meeting to order. Please stand, if willing and able, to salute the flag and then pause for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's meeting is being recorded with audio and visual devices. There are also hearing aids available for anyone who may need them. On a motion by the Vice Mayor to accept the minutes of the regularly scheduled City Council meeting held on February 4th, 2019, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes are so adopted. We now move on to public comment. Public comment is the time in the meeting when the public can speak for up to 3 minutes on any issue on tonight's agenda, with the exception of communications and awaiting reports. To your left, you will see a screen that will count down your 3 minutes. You will hear an initial tone at 15 seconds, which is your cue to start to wrap up, and then a second tone when your 3 minutes is over. You will also see the name of the next speaker so that you can get prepared. We ask that when you come to the microphone that you please give your name, your address, and the issue that you're speaking on. If you have written comments, there is a basket next to the podium where you could leave your written comments, which is very helpful to our clerk. If your comments are in electronic form, you can take a business card, and if you email them to the clerk by midnight tonight, they will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. We ask that you please direct all your comments to the chair and not to individual councilors. We also ask that folks in the audience please refrain from clapping, snapping, booing, yelling, hollering, tooting, hearing, anything that might intimidate a speaker who has a different opinion than the majority of folks in the audience. We want this to be respectful of all views and all opinions, even if they are the minority opinion. With that, we will go to our first speaker, which is Frank Reese, followed by Matthew Connolly. I don't know if the microphone is on or not. Let's see is there a green light on?
Let's see, Mr. Mayor.
There you go. You're good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Franklin Reese. I live at 45 Garden Street. In fact, have been there for 46 years. And I am speaking to the issue that Vice Mayor Devereaux and Councilman Corleone were kind enough to put on the agenda, which is traffic calming in that area of Cambridge. And there's a variety of things. I'm not a city planner. I'm just a resident of that part of the world. But a group of us are concerned about the speed, particularly coming down Garden Street. Combined with lots of bicyclists from the greatest university in America. Apparently they are smart enough to get into Harvard, but they're not smart enough to obey traffic on these bicycles, which are often unlit. But there's a concern for the danger of the speed on Garden Street and the speed on Shepherd Street. And I think what we're requesting, Mr. Mayor, is if we could have a traffic study on that area of Garden Street between Linnean and the merge at Concord. We have crosswalks there that perhaps could be relocated. We also have a cut-through on Walker Street, which must be a new phenomenon on your Google GPS or on Waze that has our friendly Uber drivers and Lyft drivers zooming through Walker Street, cutting across Shepherd, heading down the elementary school parking lot in order to get to Linnean and cut a right to get to Mass Ave. So it's really become a cut-through not only for those ride services, but it is now the major delivery route for trucks going to Harvard's cafeteria in the Radcliffe Quad. So it's really become quite a congested and oftentimes dangerous part of the world to walk a dog or walk a toddler or to take your kids to Graham Park's school. We wonder if we could just have a police presence at that stop sign on Shepherd, which is often run. People do not come to a full stop, either going straight through that intersection or to take a right, which is the delivery route for the Harvard cafeteria. So that's my pitch. Not complaining, just saying it's an unsafe part of Cambridge, and before we have a tragic accident as we had in Somerville, we'd like somebody to take a look at it for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Matthew Connolly, followed by Charles Bain.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Connolly. I live at 13 Cornelius Way. I'm a member of the Linden Park Residents Association. I'm here to talk about the committee report from the Ordinance Committee on the Alexandria petition at the Metropolitan Pipe site for two reasons, really. One is just to show you how much we care about that petition. It's been about a month since that hearing, and it's been a very long process, I think, for all of the neighbors. We've heard that there would be a proposal about 7 or 8 months ago, have been to at least 4 public meetings hosted by Alexandria, including the 2 meetings last month. And I'm here before you tonight to show you we will be at every meeting between now and until this thing is finished, including ones like tonight where perhaps we don't need to be. And the second thing is I want to sort of share a little bit of the frustration that the neighbors have had with this process, in the sense that it is very long. We're all families, we're all working parents and trying to do our best. And this is a very long process for all of us. And it feels a little bit like there's an imbalance between the developer's access and ours. As just one example, if you read the actual reports, both for the planning board and at the ordinance committee, Alexandria spoke for 41 minutes at the ordinance committee. They spoke for 54 minutes before the planning board. I spoke for 6. It feels like there's a lot that happens that we don't get access to. And when we are given the opportunity, we get a very little amount of time, and Alexandria gets a lot. It's just one example. It's been about a month since the last meeting. We understand that there's going to be a meeting of the working group on March 12th, which we're encouraged by, and we've submitted a list of concerns that we're hoping Alexandria can address. But in the meantime, it feels like that there's been a lot of conversation happening in the background that we don't have any access to. And so the members of the association submitted a public records request in order to find out what communications have been happening. We've been working on that for about a month, and we're told last week it would cost $1,000 to get access to that information, and that there was no waiver that the city would grant us. That feels hard. It feels unfair. It feels like every chance and every time we try to get the information that Alexandria has, we have to spend $1,000, and we have to work 2, 3, 4 times harder than everybody else. And so I've been encouraged by the comments from the council so far, and I know that there's a lot of effort for reform. I know that everybody is working very hard, and the orders that have been done in order to get a better sense on upzoning valuation and some other things have really made some progress. But I'm hoping that the process will get even better over time, and that we should know that for all of the resources that Alexandria can bear on these things, the residents cannot. And so we're doing the best we can with what we have, but I think there's more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles, followed by Gary Mello.
Good evening. My name is Charles Bainey. I live at 78 Reservoir Street, right off of Huron Avenue. And I'm here to talk about the council's response to the MBTA's Better Bus project, and specifically to the plans for the Route 72, the Huron Avenue. Several years ago, my wife and I were able to give up owning a car, and I understand that's one of the goals of the council, to give up car ownership, reduce car ownership and use. And we were able to do so because of the reliable bus service we have on the 72 route. Now, on Sundays, the T currently runs the bus to Belmont. It's very unreliable, infrequent. We've given up. It doesn't run at the time scheduled. they miss trips, and now the T, under their, quote, Better Bus project, is planning on operating the same currently Sunday service in all the rest of the week except rush hours. So we would be prisoners of our house. The T would not run the service. We would have to reconsider our decision not to own a car because of the lack of T-bus service. The T had a meeting last week at Ringe High School, and they also have information posted on the website, and that information was very, very minimal about what the change was. They would not say how often the trips run. I tried to get that information from several different T employees. They didn't have it. I finally, after a couple of reminder emails, got the information from one of their employees. And while they say on their handout and on the website that riders on Route 72 would have about a 3-minute increase in wait times, according to the information they're giving that they finally gave me, the bus now runs every 30 to 35 minutes. It would run every 45 minutes instead. I don't know where you went to school, but my math taught me that 45 minus 35 is not 3. They also say this will be cost neutral, but they are actually cutting out one of the 3 buses that they have to serve West Cambridge and Belmont for most of the time. So we depend on the route, not just at rush hours, but at midday, evening, weekend, off-peak, early morning. And we would like the council to go on record as opposing this drastic cut in service, and to not only the council to go on record opposing, but to make sure that other city agencies are also likewise opposing it. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, if folks have their comments, please leave them and or email them to the city clerk. Gary Mello, followed by Heather Hoffman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gary Mello. I live on Franklin Street. Manager's agenda number 13 makes me ask 2 questions. How do we know that only 33 communities nationwide achieve 3 AAA bond ratings from the majors? Who keeps track of these things? Second, if we're so well managed and creditworthy, how come we can't get 2% money anymore? Thank you.
Heather, followed by Nelson Hernandez.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. I would like to add my voice to the Linden Park neighbors. And also to quote one of my long-term East Cambridge neighbors, they're building a wall around our neighborhood. We need to stop that. And we need to stop giving away all of the public good for private profit. And I'd also like to point out a couple of recurring typos in the report. ECHO is all caps, East Cambridge Housing Overlay, and ECAPS is capital E, capital C, little a, capital P, capital S, and that's East Cambridge Planning Study. It helps people to remember what they stand for if you capitalize them properly. I would also like to support the Cambridge taxi drivers. I think that they've gotten a truly bum deal, and I hope that we can find a way to treat them well and also make sure that people can get a ride when they need a ride for a reasonable amount of money. I'd also like to encourage you to support the state law that's referred to in Council Order 3 to reduce traffic fatalities. I think reducing traffic fatalities is a fine thing, and this looks like something that might actually do that. With respect to the Better Bus project, I pointed out at the Transportation Committee hearing that it very noticeably avoids any improvements to any of the routes that serve my part of town, And they could certainly use improvement. They could use not missing trips. They could restore the old routes that actually served all of my neighborhood, and especially places like the Registry of Deeds and Probate, the probate court, and the mall. They took the bus service away, and now they're going to take it even farther away. So I would really, really love the city's support on that. And with respect to condo conversion, yes, get that title information. The city has an excellent title examiner. A lot of that's available at the Registry of Deeds and would not be terribly hard to find. And you should definitely have this information. And finally, I'm pleased to see the Arts Task Force notes. We need to support artists. My kid, who is about to graduate from Mass Art, is going to move to Providence because this city doesn't provide housing or enough support for the arts. Thank you.
Thank you. Nelson Hernandez?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nelson Hernandez, 126 Pennsylvania Ave, owner of CAP 28 in Cambridge, also president of the CTDOA. We're here on an account of 3 weeks ago, you just had a meeting on considering about giving rideshare companies access to our stands. We're completely against that because as it is, we don't have places to park right now. And I believe we are a cause of the traffic problem around here. The traffic problem is all these other share cabs that come here that don't got no registration to here. So that, they don't have no regulation from Cambridge. I believe that you should regulate and enforce the laws of the people stopping in front of elderly ramps, the bikes lanes, and all these things that need to be fixed prior to giving them any stands. And as it is, a lot of these hotels right now have been built and they don't have no cab stands. And there was a cab stand at the Marriott Courtyard. There's none there right now. There's a whole bunch of Marriotts right now that don't have it. And the AC Hotel, which is in the other side of Cambridge, doesn't have a cab stand. MIT, we had 2 spots over there. Now I believe it's like they're giving rideshare pickup and drop-off point because we can't sit there. That's what it is right now. So I believe they need to look into this a little bit more and try to help the cab industry instead of taking away from the cab industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Mohanad Malak?
We like to speak for the same things for the support my colleague here, the Taxi Driver Associations. My name is Mohanad Malik, 195 Salem Street, Medford, Mass. And I've been working in the city of Cambridge over 28 years. And we like to actually support the taxi drivers and to keep the taxi industry alive as long as we can. The city lost over almost 40 to 50% of the fleet, the taxi industry. The taxi industry now, it's almost to nothing. And by giving the TNC's spot and a parking spot in the city of Cambridge, that's mean you guys, or the city, or pushing the taxi industry to the edge and putting it out of business forever. This is the last, the problem is it's not the taxi industry. The problem is too many of the TNCs. There are over 250,000 vehicles in the city of Boston and Cambridge and Brookline. So we need to minimize the amount of the traffic coming in by minimizing the amount of TNCs entering Cambridge and Boston for the sake of the environment, for the sake of the public safety. They park on the bicycle lanes under red lights. They make a U-turn on Massachusetts Avenue. They sit on the crosswalk. They cause hazard to the public, to us too, and to we like just to minimize them and keep them as in control, and maybe give them schools and give them regulations and give them a sense of direction, what to do, not to do, how to pick up customers and where and how, and just to be on the safe side, just so it won't be a hazard to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have your comments written, please feel free to leave them or email them to us. So that is the end of folks who have signed up. If you'd like to speak and have not signed up, please come on up, state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Walid Nakhoul, 12 Talar Ave in Methuen, Mass. I just want to add something to Mike. When the state regulated the ride-sharing industry, they specifically said that those cars cannot pick up within 50 feet from any cab stand. So how could that be? You guys want to give them our cab stand or next to us? They stated 50 feet. If you go ahead and review the regulation of the state, they tell you they cannot, and those rules are not being implemented whatsoever. They pull over, they take the cab stand, they pick up this and that, even though the state said they cannot do that. So there is violation right there. Not enough, they took all our businesses, and yet they just do it. It's mind-boggling. I know this country is based on rule of laws, but nothing is being implemented, nothing. It seems like they go after the little ones. Powerful companies like Uber, Lyft, and whatever, I guess they do whatever they want with no consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? James?
Thank you. James Williamson, 1000 Jackson Place. I just got off the number 1 bus across the street at the stop in front of the senior center, and there were 2 vehicles parked in where the bus stop is, and the driver, and if you just talked to the driver said, it's an Uber. So this is a serious problem that anybody who lives in Cambridge, travels, is well aware of. Ubers making U-turns across double yellow lines, doing whatever the hell they please, and the answer is, well, make it legal to do some of the things. And so I think this should be looked at carefully. I mean, I think you could maybe make an argument for having a few spots for some of these vehicles, but I really think it's giving away way too much to do this precipitously. And I'm not sure, so to get out in front of it and to take a good look at it before just saying okay to all this, I think would be a good policy. Which leads me to the so-called Better Bus Project. I don't know what's better about it. If you asked yourself, what would you do to make bus service better, you'd come up with a list, as I have, of maybe a dozen things. Not a single one is part of this so-called Better Bus Project. What it is tweaking a few bus routes. And I think almost everybody in the city of Cambridge knows nothing about this. People in Cambridge don't know that the proposed improvement for the number 1 bus route is to eliminate the loop around Harvard Yard, eliminating the stop on the far side of Harvard Yard, which many, many people use. Many seniors use this stop. I use it a lot. People going to the Fogg Art Museum, you don't want them to take their cars, do you? People coming out of Sanders Theater for the Christmas revels, you don't want them to have to walk all the way across Harvard Yard, do you, to get to where the proposed bus berth would be, the number 1 bus, to shave possibly 2 minutes off the number 1 trip. 7 minutes is the estimate time, MBTA has estimated 7 minutes to walk across Harvard Yard for a 2-minute benefit. And meanwhile, we know that down here, with the plans that city staff worked on, spent a lot of time working on the plans between Sydney and Memorial Drive, that by the MBTA and the DOT, their own data, the number 1 bus has been slowed down in both directions as a result of what was done down there, in spite of the fact that many experienced people, transportation people, tried to get that plan improved unsuccessfully. So screw the number 1 and then screw it again by removing an important bus stop. And I just want to alert the people of Cambridge, write the MBTA, get them not to do this for the number 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who has not signed up to speak but would like to comment on an issue on tonight's agenda? Okay. Seeing none, on a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to close public comment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and public comment is closed. Move to reconsiderations. There are none. We now move to the city manager's agenda on a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring the city manager's agenda before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Simmons. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 6.
6. Vice Mayor Devereaux.
I'm sorry, I'm flipping in my book. Which is the one with the planning board report about the Alexandria petition? Sorry, I can't get to mine.
It's a committee report.
It's 11, agenda 11.
It's number 11, I think.
Yes, 11.
No,
Sorry.
not 11.
No, I'm sorry, 10.
10. Then I'll pull 10. No, wait,
That's accessory apartments. That's not Alexandria.
Well, no, you can pull it.
I think it was the committee report. The committee report
Okay,
was
sorry,
not
I
a
thought
city council.
I'm sorry,
not a
I
city
thought it was the
manager.
planning board. Yeah,
No, it's just the
Okay.
committee report.
never mind.
Pleasure of the council.
Roll call on the balance?
On the balance, roll call.
On the consent agenda items, Counsel Calhoun,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux, Counsel Kelly, Counsel Mallon,
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui,
Yes.
Counsel Simmons,
Yes.
Counsel Toomey, Counsel Zondervan,
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the consent agenda items are adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move back to city manager agenda item number 6, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, city manager, relative to the appropriation of $39,340 from free cash to the general fund fire extraordinary expenditures account, which will fund the purchase of defibrillators in city buildings. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Just had a couple of quick questions. Is this to replace defibrillators, or are we installing new ones? Do we have any installed anywhere?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this was the installation of brand-new defibrillators in various city buildings, including here in City Hall, different other facilities. They put one in fire headquarters in the fire prevention area. We had determined that it was a need. There had been no, certain buildings, very few buildings had defibrillators. We felt it was important to get these in place. And my department, in conjunction with the personnel department, will be conducting some training sessions for city employees in these various buildings.
Thank you. And do we have plans to install additional ones? Because I think we need to have them pretty much everywhere.
So again, through you, Mr. Mayor, we worked with Captain Jeremy Walsh, who was our EMS training coordinator, worked in conjunction with Zoll, the manufacturer, went around also with a representative of DPW and determined the most, for lack of a better term, strategic locations which to place them. I think we'll probably continue to monitor and try to identify other locations. The good thing about defibrillators today is, it's always been the case, how great they can be when you need them, but the technology has evolved so much over the years that they really are something that is extremely simple to use. You don't need a lot of training to do them. They're located, every commercial airliner has a defibrillator, train stations, museums, libraries, gyms, all kinds of places. So we'll take a look and see if there are other locations that we need to place them in.
Great, thank you.
Pleasure of the council. I just want to thank you also for this. Actually, going back to one of the first motions I filed on the school committee when I was first elected was to get defibrillators in schools, because when I was working at the Manville School, actually the parent of a Cambridge student had a heart attack at a school event and passed away in front of his children. There were no defibrillators in the building. It was not a Cambridge public school. It was a therapeutic school. So this is really incredibly important and life-saving. So I'm glad that we're continuing to expand this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Roll call.
On agenda item number 6, Counsel Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Yes. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons.
Yes.
Counsel Tooley. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 6 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now go to City Manager Agenda Item Number 13. A communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the City of Cambridge has retained its noteworthy distinction of being one of approximately 33 municipalities in the United States with the AAA ratings from each of the nation's 3 major credit rating agencies. This was pulled by Councilor Simmons, who is also the chair of the Finance Committee. Councilor Simmons.
Thank you. The city manager has informed us that the City of Cambridge has retained its noteworthy distinction of being one of approximately 33 cities in the United States with a AAA rating from each of the nation's 3 major credit rating agencies. Each year since 1999, the city has received these ratings from Moody's Investor Service, S&P Global Ratings, and Fitch Ratings. Now, this achievement allows the city to finance important projects throughout Cambridge with the most favorable interest rate, which means property tax savings to our taxpayers. This is especially important, and we recently just had a roundtable to talk about the Tobin School and what that might cost and all the nuances that come with that project. And so this is very important that we have this type of AAA bond rating looking at this funding for the Tobin School, which we estimate to be about $250 million. Overall, including the Tobin School project, the city is projected to spend a total of $505 million for 3 school projects. These projects are financed through bond proceeds and without any state reimbursement to the city. In addition, our bonding schedule includes significant obligations for renovation to the fire headquarters and other city buildings. The rating agencies highlighted the Cambridge strong fiscal position, including significant reserve levels, a large and diverse tax base, and ample excess levy capacity under Proposition 2.5, and a strong and experienced management team. Based on this ongoing recognition from the rating agency, the City Council can be justly proud of its sound policies, as well as the city's finance team and department heads and staff for their commitment to prudently manage their expenditure and revenue operating and capital budget and programs. At this time, I'd like to have the city manager and his finance team, his very able finance team, provide some additional comments. I yield the floor.
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Councilor Simmons. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I will be brief. I will just say that with everything on the plate right now, especially with the Tobin School at $250 million, over the next 4 years projecting about $400 million in debt as we address fire stations and infrastructure at City Hall, 831 Mass Ave, Tree Bigelow. This is probably as important as it's ever been in the city's history, and I think the City Council deserves a lot of credit for this, because one of the key reasons we've been allowed to get this is our ability to make reserve funds available. And when you take a look at excess levy capacity, free cash position, these are the kind of things that have impact, so that we look at the future. I think the biggest thing that everyone deserves credit for here is the recognition of a debt stabilization fund that was put aside, recognizing the fact that there were going to be 3 major school projects coming, and how do we get prepared for them. And I'm very pleased to say we've just about finished 2 of those schools in terms of bond schedule, and as we start the 3rd one, not only have we been able to use the debt stabilization fund to really affect tax bills in a positive way while doing this type of work, but we are still in a position to have $55 million available. So that as we do the Tobin, we can continue the pattern of that our bills have been controlled and consistent. That was a commitment we made back in 2005 to the taxpayers, and I'm very proud to say we've been able to keep up with that. We have averaged an increased property tax levy of about 4.5% annually over the last 5 years, while addressing all these bond issues and having these other funds to help absorb that, I think has really played a key. I also think, when Mr. Haley talked way back when about 3 schools, I think we were thinking about 250 to 300 at most, not 505. And to be able to do that again is pretty amazing. But as we talked about at the joint school committee and city council meeting, one of the concerns was when we take on these schools, would that mean we would not be able to address other concerns at the school? And we have since also addressed over $10 million of roof repair, another $3 million in boiler replacements, and another $5 million in playgrounds related to the schools. So over roughly $20 million in non-directly related to these 3 schools have also been able to be used. So I think as we continue to look in the future, the city is in an incredibly strong position to continue the bond schedule we have to meet the needs of our residents, yet again continue to control taxes. And I think the council's ability to recognize the importance of reserve play a major factor in this, and I want to thank the council for their commitment. I also want to recognize the finance team, who does an incredible job with this, and the department heads. I mean, this is a city that doesn't spend all of its budget. Departments are not punished by that. We work together because they understand the importance of keeping a free cash position that's positive, and it's allowed us to do many projects, as you all know. So I just want to thank everybody here. It's something that the biggest winners here are the residents of the city. These 3 schools were done without 1 penny of SBA being reimbursement, and I would say there's no city in the Commonwealth spending $505 million to address its education system, which will be here for a long, long time in the future. So I want to thank everybody. I'm going to turn it over to David to just say a few words.
Mr. Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the manager noted that this is clearly a team effort led by the city manager and the deputy city manager. I'm joined at the table by the Assistant Finance Director, Michelle Kincaid, who is a key player in helping us put together the documents that are presented. In addition to that, Community Development Department puts together a demographic and a whole narrative on our economic development and how we're proceeding. When we had our rating agency call, we had the rating agency meet us at Cambridge Crossing, and they were impressed by the fact that that is a piece of Cambridge that they really didn't know about, but when they saw the plans of what will happen over the next several years, it only strengthened our argument about our local vibrant economy, and it was an impressive presentation that they heard. In addition to community development, we have the assessing department, the budget office, and the city auditor's office. Again, all the finance divisions work collaboratively to put together an expansive document in the official statement, which is used to solicit bids for the bond sale that will take place in March. And I think the manager touched upon a few things. I think we've been fortunate because of our hard work and your hard work to get our AAA ratings. But again, I think one of the things that we always have to keep in mind that in the future, we need to continue to manage our debt issuance prudently, and we need to consistently follow the management and fiscal practices that are in place, that are adhered to and voted on by the City Council annually. Produce positive balance sheets. That's important to make sure that we're not spending more money than we actually take in, and to fund our future long-term obligations, which are pensions and our OPEB liabilities. And again, to support our local vibrant economy, which is so important in terms of generating non-property tax revenue and property tax revenue. So again, another solid effort, and we will obviously work hard to continue to maintain the AAA ratings. Michelle, do you have anything to add? Okay, thank you.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is my sixth similar meeting where we, thanks to your efforts, have gotten AAA ratings all across the board. And as wonderful as this is, this seems to be the standard in the city, and you're to be congratulated for that. However, when you read the reports, there are lots of questions I would like to ask, and I think others would too. And as I recall, 2 years ago, we talked about having an information meeting I don't want to bore people with what this means and that means in the report. So I hope we do it soon. And for a city that constantly has $200 million in free cash, which we use for different important things, and an excess tax capacity that's quite high, when we say we have to meet the budget, I understand we don't want to raise taxes exorbitantly, but that's a rare condition, and we all have issues that we want addressed, and I know that's the difficult part of a budget. But to me, these three documents say we can do the things that we've been talking about for years. And I sincerely hope that this discussion that is warranted leads us in that direction as soon as possible. And granted that the coming budget is largely in place, I understand that, but I don't want to go a seventh year and see very little change. We're making changes, but we're talking about significant changes, and I won't go through the list. I won't bore you with that now. But to me, these reports state we can do it. And I hope that that meeting, that discussion, that we get to that as well. I know I'm not the only one who feels this way, and I don't want it to wait to the day the budget comes out, that we say, oh yeah, we should have that meeting. We really should. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. Manager,
Through
do
you,
you have a
Mr. Mayor.
response?
So we will work with the finance chair to set up that meeting. It's a strong story that we're happy to tell. I don't think that meeting is going to change the budget, to be very honest. I think I have really tried hard in this will be the third budget that I present, to really listen to the city council. I've added over 50 positions in the first two budgets that I submitted based on really what the city needed to get things done. I put building permit revenue into affordable housing for the first time in the city, and I know there's more to do. But I will tell you, I don't think any city anywhere provides the services we provide and still manages to keep the tax bill at a reasonable amount. I think that's something that we should be proud of, but that doesn't mean we can't take a look at how we can continue to spend and spend more. But always, I will say from my point of view, it has to be in recognition on the impact it has on the taxpayers as well. And I think this council has done a phenomenal job working with managers for a long time to address those needs, and I've had many conversations, and I think we're going to get to a good place. I'm really confident that we can produce a budget this year that people will feel like we've listened, and we can do something that will have some significant impact and can still control the tax bills.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I concur with my colleague. I made some similar statements last year, and I want to restate them because I think as each year goes by, I think about the credit challenges, the high regional cost of living, the cost of business, and every time we get called about a small business that has to leave because, you know, the rent's too high or someone gets evicted, and I recognize that I wasn't around 30, 40 years ago. We've come a long way. We're growing. That's what developing cities do. There's a lot of good in that. But to never lose sight of what's ahead and thinking about who is in our city now and how our city is changing. So that's why I do appreciate your comments of we have a lot of work to do and look forward to the budget hearings. I look forward as we move toward prioritizing our goals, that we can come to a place where we recognize these credit challenges because they're challenges, and they're some of the challenges that are facing Cambridge that are really changing our city. So that's all I'll say. I appreciate this, the term that I've circled many times, the conservative fiscal management, and I appreciate the work that your team has put into this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would just like to say I appreciate that. I do think
that one thing I've made a priority since I've been city manager, but even as finance director, is to really try to listen to what the goals of the city council and have the budget reflect that. And we will continue to work with you to assure you that we can get to where we want to go and still keep the financial position in a place that will hold our rating to affect us long term. But I think we can get that balance. I think we've done a pretty good job doing that balance, but I think we can continue to talk to how we can do even better. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Thank you, through you. And thank you to the manager and our finance team. There's no question that objectively you're doing a superb job, and that's been recognized by the rating agencies. And so, anything that I say or that we say isn't meant as a slight to that. It's simply to help round out the perspective. And I think what Councillor Siddiqui was saying about the impact on small businesses, it's a little bit ironic that that Cambridge Crossing and North Point were cited as, an indication of the strength, because if you go to Harvard Square, you see the weakness, but the two are not unconnected. And the same forces that are pulling up all those values, as you well know, on one side of town are having a tremendous impact on Harvard Square and the small businesses. And that is related in some measure to the taxes. Not necessarily, the taxes for residents in general are low, particularly people who can claim the owner occupancy exemption, residential exemption. But for local owners of small businesses who are in buildings where the assessments climb steadily, I was notified that O2 Yoga and Vegan Cafe will be closing. It's on Mass Ave. It's a family-owned business, and the family has had some difficult circumstances, so it's not entirely to do with the costs. But I did, just from my own knowledge, go and look at the assessment of that building. They're in a building with other retail tenants, including, I believe, the Sage medical marijuana business, which can certainly pay a higher rent than most local businesses. But the assessment, rose from fiscal year 16, it was 5.98 million, and last year it was 8.4 million. And I don't know what the exact impact on their tax payment is, but their business is not growing, and that was the only vegan cafe in the city. So we've lost that. And those things are happening every single day, and it's having, as Councillor Siddiqui noted, an impact, on the fabric of our city. The other thing I want to mention, because this came up in the fall, was the extent to which, when we talk about some of the Envision recommendations for increasing the number of housing units, the impact that will have on the amount of growth that will be needed in the commercial segment to keep the tax levy in line. And I believe, Mr. Manager, you had expressed some concerns that we have to be very careful about when we have a significant increase in the number of housing units and residents. In order to keep resident taxes low and services high, we have to generate new commercial development, and and in some ways it's a vicious cycle, because the one fuels the other. So I don't think we've ever gotten a more precise idea of how that will work. But as we head into hearings on some of the Envision recommendations for housing growth, I think people are going to ask to see some of the math and to really understand it, because I don't think it's necessarily widely appreciated the extent to which the commercial growth is going to have to significantly, exceed what we're talking about in the housing sector. So that's what I have to say. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Through you,
Mr. Manager.
So, excellent points. The one thing I would say on the commercial side is that assessments are high, but we've balanced that off with the lowest commercial tax rate in the region. And I think if you take a look at the abatement applications on the commercial side, it is an unheard of that we have about 65 abatement requests. So even though we need to address the vacancy concerns, I think what the rating agency is looking at are the big numbers, which are the big projects. And if you look at probably cities similar to ours, our vacancies and from their point of view, would be not considered that highly. That doesn't mean we shouldn't take them serious and we shouldn't spend a lot of attention. I think I really want to thank the council for really pushing us. The Community Development Department has really spent a lot of time now in the economic development area, especially making sure we come up with new ideas on how we can help our small businesses. And I think what you're seeing in Emmett Square is something that we are in uncharted waters, and we are thinking creatively on how we can support them. And I'm pleased at what direction we're going. There's still a long way to go, but we've heard the council, and I think it's a good point that we need to take a look at this, and I think we can get there. And I think as we continue to do residential growth, I feel all we need to do is continue that we need a balance, and it's important that people do understand what that balance is. It is very confusing. I will tell you that. It's very difficult to explain. I've probably been looking at it now specifically for about 20 years, and every time I revisit it, I almost have to start over again. But I think it is an important thing, and I think as part of this overall assessment, when we talk about the rating agency document, this is an area we could spend some time, and I'd be happy to do that. So thank you.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, my thanks also to the team for another excellent outcome. As has been noted, this has become our standard, for better or for worse. We just expect it now. I just want to second my colleagues' comments. It's great that we are in this strong financial position, and it's challenging to see some of the areas in our city that are somewhat neglected, and trying to achieve that balance is very difficult. But I look forward to continue to work with you and your team and with my colleagues to figure out how we can direct in a responsible way more funding towards some of the things that we clearly need to invest in for the future. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Pleasure of the council. I just thank you. As many have said, this has become the standard, but I also think it's important to note that it hasn't always been. And, we hear sometimes from folks in the community, well, we have Harvard and MIT. Of course. Well, we've had Harvard and MIT for a long time, and we had junk bond status for a while, too. And we were broke for a while, too. And so, we are certainly in a better position than many other cities, having Kendall Square and Harvard and MIT and other things, but it also does take sound management. It's not as simple as, just rolling the dice and let it happen. So I thank you for that, because it's not always a guarantee, and it may not be 10 years from now. It may be a different story 20 years from now. So I appreciate your efforts to keep this moving along. With that, the question comes on placing the matter on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The matter is placed on file. We now move to the calendar. Pleasure of the council. I think everything is, other than number 3, is waiting on the state legislature. Are we passing over all of these? I guess so. On a motion by Councilor Zondervan to pass over, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to applications and petitions. Pleasure of the council. Vice Mayor?
I guess I'd like to pull number 4, please.
Pleasure of the council.
Move that we adopt 1 and 5 and 2 and 3 approve with surety.
All in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to petition number 4. A petition was received from Cambridge Taxi Drivers Owners Association regarding helping to support the Cambridge taxi industry and improve transportation in the city of Cambridge. Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Well, I want to acknowledge the members of the Taxi Owners and Drivers Association. I think it definitely, is time for us to talk about how we can balance the various needs for rideshare, traditional taxi, and all of the other sort of new mobility services. We've talked a lot about curb space and how do we manage it. And so I would like to hear from my colleagues how you would like to handle. I can offer one thing, which is as chair of the Transportation Committee, I could have a public hearing to have an opportunity to talk about some of these issues in a little more depth. I know that other cities, I think New York has experimented with a cap on the number of TNC drivers. I don't know how it worked. I don't know if it's still in effect. I don't really understand, how that would work, but I think we clearly have evidence that shows that some of the traffic congestion we're experiencing is the result of the ride shares. I think we've learned a lot about what these services do well and what they don't do so well. I think it's interesting when you compare our response last summer when Bird wanted to drop 100 scooters in town, and we stood firm and said, no, we're not ready. Well, if you turn the clock back to 2015, I think it was, when the same was happening with Uber, we had a different response. And, in hindsight, that probably wasn't, as wise as it could have been. So I don't have any promises to make. I don't have any, foregone conclusions about what actions I would like to take, but I do think that it would be helpful for us to discuss this among ourselves and with members of our staff to figure out what we're trying to do and to hear a little bit more from some of the taxi owners. I will say that I took a taxi home from the airport this morning. I always make a point of when there is a taxi stand at a place like an airport and there are taxis waiting, I take them. However, I do use Lyft for, times when I'm someplace nowhere near a taxi stand, and it's the easiest thing to do is to pull out my app and summon one. So, we have a hybrid system, and I think we need to figure out a way to have it work not only for the users, but for the people operating all of these services. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Simmons.
Thank you. I would certainly agree that we should have, if the chair is willing, to have a hearing or two for the taxi cab industry, and also to revisit the whole idea of TNCs and how they operate. The use of our loading zones. Loading zones in terms of pulling off, I think in my opinion, is something I like to see on the table to have a talk about. Are we using them effectively? Because a loading zone kind of prohibits you from parking at all when there's no loading going on. And so that might be a opportunity to be reused. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the taxi stands in particular, my observation has been there's no real respect given to taxi drivers. Those taxi spots, that's their office, that's their place of business, and everyone pulls into the taxi lanes, at least the ones that I've observed. And so I think it's really time, and maybe past time, that we've had to have this conversation. I'd also like to just, to what degree we can, and we can see how that falls out by way of the agenda, in terms of the insurances that TNCs carry. And it's really strange what it is, what they're supposed to carry, what they do carry. And it would be really important for us to have some discussion around there. And then lastly, it's very hard, but it'd be important for us to have a conversation about how we regulate TNCs. I think they get a wide berth when it comes to regulations and when they adhere to them and when they don't. And so before we start taking away taxi stands to make drop-offs for Uber, Lyft, and other TNCs. I think it would be very important for us to have a conversation about it. So it's certainly, again, it's the purview of the chair to have not maybe more than one conversation, because we may not be able to get all that information all at one time. And I think I can't speak for the taxi drivers in particular, but I think they feel that they've been unheard. And so I think it'd be important to have that discussion.
Thank you. I have
I yield the
Councilor
floor.
Mallon, Councilor Siddiqui, then Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I would welcome having this conversation at the Transportation Committee level. I think this is long overdue. I remember last year hearing the report that there are 6.8 million annual trips by Uber or Lyft, and that works out to be about 19,000 per day, and that's just pickups. So I think it's high time to be having this conversation about how many cars are on the road, given the city of Cambridge's commitment to removing cars and trips. To me, this is just counter to what we are trying to do here each and every day. In addition to really understanding that taxi drivers have taken a huge financial hit and devaluing their medallions. And this probably feels like one more thing that the city is taking away. If we're talking about curb access and taking away cab stands. So I would love to have a richer conversation, a more full conversation. I feel like we're having it in snippets here and there with some people, and having an opportunity to have a larger conversation at the Transportation Committee would be very welcome, I would say.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with my colleagues. Appreciate the suggestion, Vice Mayor. I thank the Taxi Association for coming and for the petition. I think there's a lot of points in this petition, particularly the list of action items that may have merit, and I think I had reached out to the city manager, and I think he was trying to get in touch with Mr. Barr, but trying to get a sense of where are we on rideshare pickup spots and drop-offs. There wasn't a conversation, but we haven't heard back on beyond. We're thinking about it. Things are happening, and so this is an opportunity not only to have a follow-up on that, but also a follow-up on these specific points that the association's recommending, or actions that would improve not only their industry, but possibly improve transportation in Cambridge. So I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to add my enthusiasm for having a committee hearing on this topic. Change is hard, and we are dealing with a very complicated hybrid system where we're trying to allow some innovation to happen that has benefits, but it also has drawbacks. I've noticed a huge uptick in cars sitting in metered parking spots idling, and a lot of them are TNCs waiting for their next ride. The taxi drivers often know the local roads and are able to navigate those more efficiently than somebody who's just blindly following a GPS, which doesn't always, let's face it, doesn't always give the right directions in the city. So there's a lot of benefits to having TNCs and benefits to having taxis. There's also trade-offs, and I think there are ways to blend these two models and make sure that both can operate successfully and provide the best service that we can have. I would love to discuss the idea of having congestion pricing for the TNCs. They already implement their own congestion pricing, and then if we are able to put a surcharge on that, we can reduce some of the influx of cars coming into our city, reduce some of the congestion that we're seeing, and also raise some revenues that way, which might be a gentler way to do it than to try to put a hard cap and somehow estimate what the need is. So anyway, I think I look forward to the committee discussion. I think there's a lot of rich topics that we can explore to improve the situation and hopefully make things better for the taxi drivers and for our residents.
Thank you. Anything further? So on a motion by the Vice Mayor to refer this petition to the Transportation Committee for further hearings, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to communications. Pleasure of the council.
Move to place on file.
Councilor Zondervan, I believe, is going to pull a communication.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to pull number 2.
Okay. On placing number 1 on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Number 2, a communication was received from Warren Bayer, Secretary, Cambridge Democratic City Committee, regarding the municipal broadband resolution adopted by the Cambridge Democratic City Committee. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do promise to be very brief. I just wanted to read the resolved and also I just have a couple of quick comments. So the resolution says, resolved that the Cambridge Democratic City Committee recommends that the City of Cambridge take immediate steps to move forward with municipal broadband with the aim of laying a fiber optic network to be owned and operated by the city in the public interest, using this network to provide phone and internet services to residences and businesses while providing identical services to low-income residents, either free or minimal cost, and incorporating into its plans an inviolable commitment to net neutrality and user privacy. So I think this is a very timely resolution. The city is about to begin its work on a digital equity study and formulating a digital divide advisory council. So I hope that as we begin that important work, we can continue to explore how we can get to a municipal broadband solution in Cambridge, which could have a lot of benefits and advantages for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? On placing the matter on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Resolutions. On a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring forward resolutions making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. On adopting 1 through 8, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move forward to policy orders. On a motion by the Vice Mayor to bring policy orders before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to pull number 2 and 6, please.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Siddiqui.
I'd like to pull number 7, please.
Pleasure of the council. On adoption of the balance, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move back to policy order number 2, that the city manager is requested to confer with the Traffic, Parking, and Transportation Department, Community Development Department, and Department of Public Works to provide data on speed and vehicle counts on Garden Street between Concord Avenue and Linnean Street and identify potential measures to improve its pedestrian and bicycle safety. This was filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Carlone. Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, as is becoming typical with some of these requests for traffic calming studies or interventions, it really is happening all around the city. And, you know, it's kind of a case of squeaky wheels getting the grease, and that doesn't necessarily feel always like the best way to go about it. So this conversation originated with the concern that's stated in the policy order, which is really about Garden Street and what can be done there. And it's interesting because that street in the 2015 Bicycle Network Plan was identified as a sort of, you know, relatively comfortable street that was a low-speed corridor that could live with only sharrows. And immediately when the street was repaved and sort of, you know, resurfaced a few years ago and then marked with sharrows rather than bike lanes, many of the cycling advocates were like, we missed the boat on this. It really should have better protections for cyclists. It is a street that cyclists use because Concord Avenue is pretty much impossible to bicycle on. It's just too darn narrow. And in this corridor between Linnean Street and toward Harvard Square, Concord Avenue, we have a blue bike station right at the Radcliffe Quad. We We have a lot of students on bicycles, and it really is a main connector. So I think traffic calming is really needed there as a part of our entire policy. If we think this is a low-speed corridor, then we have to do something to make it a low-speed corridor, whether it's more physical improvements, which I know probably the city is loath to do because we've already spent money on the street, or whether it's greater enforcement, or whether it's some tactical interventions that we can do. But then as we had emails back and forth on this, it sort of broadened to some of the things that were raised in public comment. For instance, the cut-through traffic on Walker Street, which is sort of a dog-leg street that you can zig and zag on. And to hear tonight that trucks are using that as the way to get to the, to the dining halls at the Radcliffe Quad is just completely inappropriate. So I don't know what we can do to restrict large trucks on Walker Street, but there shouldn't be any truck traffic on Walker Street as far as I'm concerned, unless it's a moving truck going to one of those houses or a UPS vehicle. So the policy order talks about the study on Garden Street specifically, but if we could amend it to maybe broaden it to be more focused on how that sort of area around the quad functions and what we can do to keep it safe. Because the safety, it was mentioned in public comment that, the behavior of some of the cyclists may not be ideal, and I would certainly acknowledge that can be said on any street, but the main problem on this street is that we've got a street that's physically designed for speeds greater than we want to see, and it has been identified as one of the streets that will be a 20-mile-an-hour street, as will Walker, as will Shepherd, but without enforcement and without any changes, we won't get the outcomes we want. So I'll give the clerk maybe another sentence to throw in there and let someone else speak if they like. Thank you.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Vice Mayor Devereaux is absolutely correct, and this is my neighborhood, and I could see the difference also over the last few years. And the problem really comes down to this. Garden Street is an arterial road, even though it's a residentially designed road, without stoplights from one end to Huron Avenue, from Harvard Square to Huron Avenue. And it's straight as can be, and people think, why not go fast? Because every indication is you should go fast, except for perhaps a speed sign, which doesn't exist. And that's how the road is designed, unintentionally, but that's the case in many areas of the city. I was not aware Walker was overpowered by trucks. I walked down Walker quite a bit. Shepherd Street, however, as Mr. Reese said in the public comment, people go right through that traffic light without even stopping. Because I cross there from Walker, I can see it all the time. So the wonderful thing about the traffic department is subtle changes may have a big impact. I'm not suggesting one-way streets are introduced, directions change, but there are things that can be done that are subtle to the extreme. Having a traffic light at Shepherd, raised crossings at the intersection have been mentioned. But even other things can be done, switching parking from one side to the other as the street goes down. There are a number of things that can be done. The wonderful thing about asphalt is you don't feel bumps. In the old days when it was cobblestone, it was noisy, but people did not travel fast. So we've gone to being quiet, and it results in extra speed. So all this is really matter of fact and should be done in a neighborhood where requests like this haven't happened except on Oxford Street, across Mass Avenue, where raised intersections were put into effect and have helped quite a bit. So I'm hoping the same thing happens here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, do you have amendment language?
Yes,
Clerk,
I
do you have
gave
it?
something to the clerk.
Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the amendment is in the first ordered section. After the words sections of Garden Street, the Vice Mayor is adding the words as well as Walker Street and Shepherd Street.
On the amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. On the order as amended, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to policy order number 6, City Council feedback on the MBTA Better Bus Project proposals. This was filed by Vice Mayor Devereaux, Councilor Mallon, Councilor Carlone, and Councilor Zondervan. Vice Mayor Devereaux?
Thank you. So I appreciate Mr. Bainey, who came in and spoke during public comment, and particularly his persistence in trying to prize from the MBTA the information that the staff has also been trying to pry out of them, which is when you say these are the general changes to the schedule, what does that really mean in terms of like, well, how long will I have to wait at peak and off peak? And it turns out that, you know, on the routes that he was calling out, the 72, 75 in the Huron Avenue area, the waits are fairly significant. And the most troubling thing, I think, is something that came up at the committee hearing, is that the peak and off-peak service may be okay, but peak and off-peak are very narrow windows of time. It's 90 minutes in the morning, 7:30 to 9, and 90 minutes in the afternoon, 4:30 to 6. And many people do not, you know, take the bus in those hours. The majority of the day, you have a very long wait for a bus. And I think when we have somebody, you know, a longtime resident of the neighborhood who is older, so, you know, one of the people who arguably could be said, well, we can't rely on only transit or only on bicycles, tell us that their decision, you know, to try to live without a car in Cambridge is being jeopardized because of these changes that are billed as modest, but which really aren't. I think that raises a real red flag. Similarly, the changes on to the number 1 route, eliminating the loop around Harvard Yard, you know, I mean, I think it's being done for efficiency, but this gentleman also pointed out that it was actually tried back in 1979 and failed miserably and had to be, you know, the change had to be retracted after several months because there was so much illegal parking on Dunster Street and it was so narrow that the buses had a difficult time. So maybe the MBTA doesn't have a long enough memory to know that they already tried this and it didn't work. So, you know, the committee report isn't ready yet, which is not at all criticism of the clerk because she has a long backlog of reports and the committee hearing was only last week. But given that the timing is tight and we want the MBTA to really know that there were a lot of questions and concerns raised about these changes, I wanted to make sure that we had something on tonight's agenda since we're not meeting a week from tonight, and that when that committee report is ready, that it go to the MBTA and to our state delegation so that people know that we're not just going to say, oh, well, if you think these changes are going to make better buses, go ahead, because I think there's a lot of resistance, and I also think there's still very low awareness. We've also heard anecdotally that even some of the drivers on the route, again on this 72 route, are saying to passengers on the buses, you know, this is not necessarily for the best. And when you hear the drivers saying that, that also should be telling us something. So I hope my colleagues will agree that we need to really dig into what these changes, the impact that they will have. And just to Heather Hoffman's point about them not offering any improvement to her neighborhood in East Cambridge, you know, that's absolutely true. They clearly looked for routes where they could make small cost-neutral changes and have some impact on efficiency, but, you know, they're not, this isn't the bigger set of real service improvements that would require looking holistically at the entire system of buses regionally and the resources and really providing significant improvements. This is just, you know, sort of doing stuff around the edges, and it's, I think, quite a disappointment, and, they probably should not have called it the Better Bus Project. Thanks.
Pleasure. Councilor Carlo.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. The Vice Mayor is, of course, right on target here, and it just seems to me, and related to our conversation earlier about the manager's report number 13, that yes, we have a regional transportation system, but the city, especially a wealthy city with reserves, can supplement any loss in the regional system. I mean, we're paying in part for the North Point station at Lechmere Square, and maybe we can add to the funding to get better bus service to areas of the city, whether it's East Cambridge or Huron Avenue, because that's our future. If we don't do that, we're going to create bigger problems. And if we fantasize that we can have major development, commercial development in the quadrangle without having an excellent bus system there, it's going to be a major disaster. So the way to avoid that is to step up and be part of the solution. So I totally support the Vice Mayor's proposal.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I want to just add my disappointment with this proposal to increase the fares at the same time that the service is being degraded is frankly insulting. And we are a wealthy city, and maybe we can supplement some of these transportation solutions, but we're also a wealthy state. And, I don't understand, honestly, why we are constantly in this position where somehow our transportation agency doesn't have the funds that it needs to expand and match the growth that we're seeing here in Cambridge and in the Boston area in general. So I hope that our message will be heard to some extent, and that they'll reconsider this ill-conceived plan. Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move on to policy order number 7. The city manager is requested to instruct the assessor's office to provide up-to-date condo conversion data. This was filed by Councilor Siddiqui and myself. Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to pull this and talk a little bit about the conversation on the task force about condo conversions. I think we all know that the last time this issue came up was in 2000, and it's easy for me to say, oh, I wish we had done something then, but I do wish we had done something then. But moving forward, what can be done now? And I think some of the data that we requested will be helpful. I will say that, just for context, cities have different ways they've changed the requirements for condo conversion. There's increased notice periods. There's increased relocation assistance paid by the landlord. Right now, under the law, it's $750. Other towns have increased that. There's a number of things that perhaps we can look into and be discussing. And I think in the past, in 2017, Councillor Carlone and Vice Mayor Devereux did put in a policy order about looking into condo conversions and revising our ordinance. So I think as this task force moves forward and we think about tenant displacement, I think that's a very important question. I think there is this notion that, there's so many conversions that have happened. There's not much that can be done. I think it is our duty to figure out if that is the case, then why, and figure out some of those questions. I think we have a big problem with tenants being evicted, and then we have the owners filing condo conversion papers for vacant buildings. So it's important to know how often is that happening. And so if there are other questions that you think would be pertinent, I'm happy to add those. I think this is a good start. I think we have some recent data from 2015, but a lot happens in four years, and as we know, the market is changing. So better act on this now before there is no looking back. So that's the order, and I hope that you will join me in supporting this policy order. Thanks.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I'm glad that you all are taking this on in the task force. One thing that condo conversion does is it takes units which were rented and changes them into ownership units. And in some respects, that could be considered a good thing, because one of the things we talk about a lot with new development is that it's in almost entirely rental units. And, yes, there are inclusionary units, and that's great because they're required in the larger developments, but it's still not doing anything for wealth creation, which is, the real sort of catch-22 in the real estate thing is that the principal way that, not to use a pun, but that the way that people create wealth and equity is through home ownership. And so if there were a way to require inclusionary units in buildings, in existing buildings that are being basically emptied out and got renovated, we could claw back at least some ownership that was affordable, because we're not seeing many affordable ownership units. So I don't, that may not be beyond the scope of the task force, but, it is a problem of displacement and a side effect of the condo conversion. It's great for the people who can, afford to buy that starter home, which may be a one-bedroom condo for $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000, but it's not meeting our goals for true affordability. So thank you for looking into this.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also like to thank my colleagues for bringing this forward. I think it is long overdue, and of course we can't go back in time, but we can move forward and try to address it now. One issue that I would urge you to look into as well as part of this examination is kind of stealth condo conversion. So you mentioned the situation where the building is vacated ahead of time, but there's also situations where it's a partial conversion, or there's some new development associated with it, and so it doesn't fall under the condo conversion laws, but it ultimately has the same impact on the tenants. So to the extent that we can mitigate some of that, so that we can address some of those situations that currently aren't being captured, that would be helpful as well, and particularly in your data request, to see if you can see some of that in there as well, because if it's just very straight up, cases, you might miss some of those edge cases as well. So again, thank you very much for bringing this forward, and I fully support it.
Thank you. So I want to thank Councilor Siddiqui as well, and I think this is following a good trend of these task forces, similar to the Arts Task Force, where recommendations are coming out to move things forward on an ongoing basis, and we're not waiting till the task force is over to get a list of things, but things are kind of moving along. And I do think when we look at displacement, I'll be interested to see what the data shows, but I bet what we're probably going to see, just based on the people who come to, many of the people who come to my office, is that it's somebody flipping, they buy a house, they're going to flip it and convert it into condos, and that's causing displacement. I will say, and I wonder if this is something we have to ask for. We'll be able to tell this. I do think, like anything else, everything is complicated, and we can't just put every conversion into the same bucket. I mean, I know people, and I'll be honest, this is something that a situation my brother and I are going to have to struggle with now that we have the house that we live in, is sometimes people who live in the house and convert maybe 2 of their apartments to condos need to do that for financial reasons so they can stay in the house. I don't want those people to be, not be allowed to do that. It's really what we're seeing more of is like Harding Street and, was it 6th Street? 7th? Where, somebody comes in, they overpay for the property, and then, they kick folks out. And one of the biggest things is folks don't know what their rights really are. There are protections, but most people don't know what those protections are, so they get a notice saying you have to be out by this amount of time, and they don't really know, how to, what their rights are. And some of them have, they reach out to us, or they reach out, they can, they have networks, but a lot of people don't, and they end up just leaving without, maybe when they don't have to. So this is great, and it's great work. And you raising your hand to speak again?
Yes.
You are.
Yeah.
It's like a subtle auction kind of thing. I don't know if you're.
No, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to just address the questions both of you raised. As far as the converted, what's being partially or completely vacant, I did put a question about which converted properties were being delivered partially, and I will follow up with the assessors just to make sure if we can gather that data. And then to your point, I completely agree, and I think that's why it is going to be important to know the property sizes of the units that have been converted. So I asked that question. So hopefully we'll know, is it 3 units or is it these 25-unit buildings or the 5-unit or the 6-unit? So I look forward to the data and then using it to hopefully guide us somewhere proactive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Carlin.
Getting back to your point, Mr. Mayor, about people who live in the building and stay in the building, that's different than a developer buying a 3 or a 5 and never going to live in there and just maximizing it. And I know we've talked about this related to other issues in the city, but it seems to me that's an important question. To preserve people, keep people in their building is one thing, as opposed to just selling it and running away.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are big goals there.
Yeah, and what we also see a lot of is that a lot of the folks who, particularly if it's a building that has been owned for a long time by, a long time Cambridge family, and they're selling for whatever reason, right? They want to retire, or their kids inherit it, or grandkids inherit, whatever. A lot of the people who live in those apartments don't have leases because they've just been sort of tenant at will. They've been there for a long time, and that creates another issue when those buildings are being converted. So we got to look at all of that. So on adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to committee reports. Vice Mayor Devereaux would like to pull committee report number 1. This is a communication was received from Donna P. Lopez, City Clerk, transmitting a report from Councilor Dennis J. Carlone and Councilor Craig A. Kelly, co-chairs of the Ordinance Committee, for a public hearing held on January 30th, 2019 to discuss a petition filed by Joseph T. McGuire, Alexandria Real Estate Equities, Inc., to amend the zoning ordinance by creating the Grand Junction Pathway Overlay District adjacent to the Grand Junction Railroad right-of-way between Binney and Cambridge Street. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to thank Matthew Connolly, who came to speak tonight about this. And, this is what he was talking about with the disadvantage that groups of residents feel in trying to be a part of these discussions is something that has come up time and again. They are at a disadvantage. They don't have teams of lawyers, and they don't have, by and large, access to staff at CDD to come in and have these informal consultations. Well, okay, so we submitted our petition, and the planning board wasn't wild about it, and the council wasn't wild about it. So, we'll have more conversations. And so I was trying, since we have the committee co-chairs here, I was trying to find out where we are on those things, because one of the in the committee report it says toward the end, that they would have working meetings, and it does say that Mr. McGuire agreed to meet and wanted appropriate staff for architectural design and analysis, and he wanted someone in opposition to be in this meeting, and to have some residents involved in the discussion. So I'm kind of trying to get a sense of what the public involvement is, because if they're feeling they have to do public record requests to feel like things aren't going on behind the scenes that they don't know, that's not good.
Thank
Councilor
you,
Carlin?
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Vice Mayor, as well. Alexandria has reached out to co-chairs Kelly and myself to meet with them. I've met with them twice already, and I shared many of the opinions that people in this room had at the Ordinance Committee. They heard the Ordinance Committee. And the goal is to reduce the impact of whatever they propose. The public meeting takes place tentatively, I don't know if it's all been agreed on, Tuesday, I believe at 6 o'clock. And 3 neighbors have said they will be there. One is here. And Alexandria has reached out to community development as well for that meeting. Aram Farouk will be in Washington, D.C., but Jeff Roberts will be there. And the reason Alexandria had meetings with me prior to that was, quite frankly, to push them to modify before having a meeting with the tenants. That doesn't mean anything is concluded or anything is decided, but there have been steps I think will be perceived as in the right direction. But the neighbors have not been a part of that, and they will be on the 12th, as I said. And I've personally encouraged the neighbors to do exactly what they're doing, to feel. As far as Mr. Connolly's comments about the $1,000, I think I've heard this through other people. I think it's obscene, and it should be public information, getting from the city a record of the meetings. In the process of any development of a building, the developer will come to the city many times to work things out, to understand what they think the zoning is, present and proposed. And I don't recall how many times the developers met with the neighborhood to date. I was at one meeting. It's a long process, and it won't be decided within the 90 days. I've already told Alexandria that I don't think any of us thinks that, and they get it. So hopefully the dialogue will be positive on the 12th. I'm actually flying back from NLC so I could go directly to that meeting. That's as much as I know.
As Vice Mayor still has the floor.
I wanted to thank you for that, because I wasn't aware that there would be a meeting, and it's not meant to as a reproach at all to the co-chairs for having this, because we actually asked them to do that, but it is the sort of perception that conversations are happening, outside of truly public meetings. So, and it is different when developers come to CDD to get advice. For instance, on special permit projects, in most cases, they're working within zoning, and they're making they're working with the staff to understand how the zoning can be, used for their project, and it's an iterative thing. This is a little bit different because they're asking for a zoning change in order to do a project. So it does feel different in terms of access to to CDD because it's a more negotiated thing. But I'm glad that there's this meeting next Tuesday, and I hope that the last 2 years straight we've had snow in Washington, and it's made all of our return plans very difficult. So I will hope that there is not any difficulty and you're getting back on Tuesday night to attend that meeting. Thank you.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, and thanks to my co-chair as well. I've met with Alexander. I've met with the neighbors. I think Councilor Carlone and I both are happy to meet, as I suspect everyone here is, with anyone about anything pretty much at any time. And we caution people not to think that any one, two, or three of us are the decision makers in a body of 9. So all I try to do, and I think I speak for Councilor Carlone as well, is try and facilitate the discussion as best we can. I can certainly understand why neighbors would feel like they are sort of out-muscled in this discussion, because obviously they live there and they're doing this sort of as their side job, or whatever one might call it, as opposed to their daytime job. And I don't know that any of us isn't troubled by that, but I don't know that any of us has a real easy answer for that. And whatever happens at this site, it'll be done. And whatever these neighbors have learned, they will keep that knowledge, and they're unlikely ever really to have to use it again. And so it'll be another group of neighbors someplace else that learns more about the zoning process than they ever thought. But I think any of the 9 of us will do anything to inform people as well as we can. There's no intent to be secret about anything. And I suspect the same is absolutely true for CDD as well. It's just more difficult on that end when the communication is sort of in a different frame in terms of weekends and evenings as opposed to someone's regular job. So if people have better ideas of how we can communicate with them, by all means, share them with us.
Councilor Siddiqui? Yeah, you yielding to Councilor Carlone, or are you?
Sure.
Okay, Councilor Carlone?
Well, thank you both. I just wanted to add on to my co-chair's comments. Community development was invited to upcoming meetings with New England Development about the Cambridge side redevelopment, and their response was, "We'd love to help you. We can't participate until the submission is being presented at the planning board. That this is New England Development's submission. We don't have the time to do prep work, and they are trying to hire more people so they can, and quite frankly, they should be there early on. And this isn't a criticism. If they could do it, they would be there. But in a way, we're trying to facilitate that, what we believe would be said at the planning board and what we heard here. So that is one of the problems, is there is insufficient staff at community development to participate in the early meetings. Because with neighbors where it matters, or just with co-chairs or other councilors. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I concur about this imbalance that we have. I think we have long presentations, and then we are giving 2 minutes, 3 minutes for public comment, and at the same time, we have a finite amount of time to go through a presentation. We have about it's the discretion of the chair to extend the meetings, and in some cases, we may have to make a call of, given a topic, to extend meeting time to hear from the public. That's one option I can think of. But I think there are things that are happening that perhaps will lead to more of a balance, perhaps not equal, but more of a balance. And I also wanted to acknowledge Mr. Lino Becerra, who's here, along with Mr. Connolly, who's come up many times. So thank you for being here and participating.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to echo my colleagues' comments. I think we all feel and understand this imbalance of power between the developers negotiating some of these projects with the city. I think perhaps the concern here is that the neighbors don't feel heard yet, and hopefully next week they might feel more heard based on what's presented to them. But right now, I can imagine it feels like there's some silence, and they're not really sure where this is going. So I don't know if there's ways to share some of the information that's being discussed more proactively, or to give them some updates on where things are going along the way. That might help.
Thank you. And I want to sort of follow up on some of this, and I do, as many folks have said, that, it is harder on the residents because this isn't their full-time job, right? But I do also want to point out a couple things, because I hope it brings some comfort to the residents. I mean, I get that this has been a long process, but that's actually a good thing, because if we didn't approve this petition out of the gate, right? It's a long process because we have a lot of concerns that were raised to us by the neighbors, and by if we weren't listening and we didn't share those concerns, we would have approved this already and it would have moved on. So you are being heard. And sometimes the official meetings, just the way official meetings run and what's allowed and what's not allowed, it certainly can feel very imbalanced. But I do want to say, as Councilor Kelly said, I know several of us have met with neighbors individually, have worked around people's schedules, have gone out, visited in neighbors' homes. I have met with neighbors as many times as I've talked to Alexandria about this. So, I think the council is always available. I think this council does an exceptional job of meeting with neighbors and people in the community at times that are often more convenient for the community members than maybe for the councilors themselves, given that we have lives outside of this chamber as well. So I just, I think we're going to continue. I think we've all expressed concerns about this project. And I think we're going to continue to raise those concerns and try to work towards something that, meets people's needs. And so I really hope folks, know that we are hearing you. And we are working on this, and I'm optimistic that between the leadership of Councilor Carlone and Councilor Kelly, and bringing the community as well as Alexandria and CDD together to the table, that we're going to get to a good place. So, anything further on accepting the report and placing on file? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Roundtable minutes, there are none. Communications and reports from other city officers.
Mr. Chair,
Councilor Mallon.
can I pull number one, please?
Councilor Mallon pulls number one. A communication was received from City Clerk Donna P. Lopez, transmitting a communication from Councilor Mallon, transmitting notes of the meeting on February 7th, 2019 of the Mayor's Arts Task Force. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say it was a really great meeting. We had a long conversation about zoning, and Mr. Roberts from the Community Development Department was able to join us and make zoning seem fun, which is not that easy to do. But we had a lot of really great ideas that came out of that meeting, and we will probably be putting something forward soon. We also had the opportunity to have the meeting at the Multicultural Arts Center, and the members of the Arts Task Force were able to see a presentation of Who is Eartha May, which was put on by Bridge Rep Theater, and I think almost all of us got a chance to see it, and it was wonderful, put on by one of our Arts Task Force members. So we've been able to move these meetings around the city and have them in different cultural institutions, and that's been really a great way to foster conversation and make people feel comfortable. Our next meeting is next Thursday night, and it'll be about licensing and permitting, and we'll be at the Cambridge Community Foundation on 99 Bishop Allen Road, and everyone is welcome to join us.
All right, thank you. Placing on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any late resolutions or late orders? None. Any announcements? Councilor Siddiqui?
Yes, thank you. I wanted everyone, since we don't have a meeting on Monday, to save the date for March 21st, our next Cambridge Digs Deep event. This one will be facilitated by Dr. Denisa, and we'll be talking more about restorative healing and affinity groups. And so please look out and keep that on your calendar. We'll have a Facebook event that can be shared. And if you have newsletters, please put the information in your newsletter. I will send you a description. Thank you. And also it's at the Cambridge Ridgeline Theater and
Cafeteria, right?
The cafeteria, yeah, not the theater. And it is, food starts at 5:30 and the session will start at 6.
Thank you. Councilor Zondervan, did I see your hand? No? Vice Mayor?
Well, it wouldn't be a council meeting in 2019 if we didn't talk about trees for 1 minute. So I'm just going to say that there is a public meeting this Thursday at 6:30 at the Morse School, and it will be a presentation by the consultants leading the Urban Forest Master Plan Task Force process, and it's the second of the sort of public catch-up meetings. So if you don't go to each of the monthly meetings, you have an opportunity to hear sort of what they've done to date. So if you would like to do that, 6:30 at the Morse School this Thursday. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Carlone?
I just wanted to mention something that Councilor Mallon and I are going to. On Thursday night, the University Lutheran Church is having an ideas meeting about their building. They hope to use a portion of the building for public use, whether that's pre-K or an arts program or the maximum affordable housing built over it. It's an interesting possibility that churches in some urban neighborhoods are looking how to support themselves in the future with declining attendance and meet their public need to help the community around it. So they're located literally between JFK Street and the upperclassmen dorms at Harvard. And I just found it a very powerful statement of a group of people who realize they have an amenity and it might help both the public and the church itself in the long run. And other people in the city have been invited from different sectors of the city, whether it's human services, pardon me, or community development, and affordable housing developers, people from pre-K programs around. It's run by the church and by a group whose name is Sacred Spaces, I think it is. It's an entity, national entity, that looks at churches and tries to bring greater life to them in a public way. That should be very interesting.
Thank you. Councilor Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you're not doing that on Thursday night, there is a talk on autonomous vehicles at the library starting at 5:30, which is probably about as relevant to what we do here as trees and housing. So certainly there's no shortage of opportunities to do more. Thank you.
And I have one for those who have children between the ages of 7 and 12. We've been working with the 4 Little League baseball divisions in the city to try and bring them together to do more cooperative things across the city. So the first of 3 citywide baseball clinics for children between the ages of 7 and 12, whether they already play Little League or whether they would like to, will be held on Saturday, March 16th in the Field House at the high school, starting at 5:30. It's open to kids who have experience and kids who don't, and they can register for Little League as well as learn some baseball skills. And so I hope to see a lot of young people running around playing baseball. Any other announcements? Nope. On a motion by Councilor Toomey to adjourn, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.